Microsoft Cybersecurity Architect SC-100 exam. Updated questions are good material for you to pass SC-100 test. 1. A customer has a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription and an Azure subscription. The customer wants to centrally manage security incidents, analyze log, audit activity, and search for potential threats across all deployed services. You need to recommend a solution for the customer. The solution must minimize costs. What should you include in the recommendation? A. Microsoft 365 Defender. B. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. C. Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. D. Microsoft Sentinel. 2. You have a customer that has a Microsoft 365 subscription and uses the free edition of Azure Active Directory, Azure AD. The customer plans to obtain an Azure subscription and provision several Azure resources. You need to evaluate the customer's security environment. What will necessitate an upgrade from the Azure AD Free Edition to the Premium Edition? A. Role-based authorization. B. Azure AD Privileged Identity Management, PIM. C. Resource-based authorization. D. Azure AD Multi-Factor Authentication. 3. You use Azure pipelines with Azure repos to implement continuous integration and continuous deployment (OCD) workflows for the deployment of applications to Azure. You need to recommend what to include in Dynamic Application Security Testing (DAST), based on the principles of the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure. What should you recommend? A. Unit testing. B. Penetration testing. C. Dependency checks. D. Threat modeling. 4. Your company has a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription. The company wants to identify and classify data in Microsoft Teams, SharePoint Online, and Exchange Online. You need to recommend a solution to identify documents that contain sensitive information. What should you include in the recommendation? A. Data Classification Content Explorer. B. Data Loss Prevention, DLP. C. E-Discovery. D. Information Governance. 5. A customer follows the Zero Trust model and explicitly verifies each attempt to access its corporate applications. The customer discovers that several endpoints are infected with malware. The customer suspends access attempts from the infected endpoints. The malware is removed from the endpoint. Which two conditions must be met before endpoint users can access the corporate applications again? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Note: each correct selection is worth 1 point. A. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint reports the endpoints as compliant. B. Microsoft Intune reports the endpoints as compliant. C. A new Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, conditional access policy is enforced. D. The client access tokens are refreshed. 6. Your company has on-premises Microsoft SQL Server databases. The company plans to move the databases to Azure. You need to recommend a secure architecture for the databases that will minimize operational requirements for patching and protect sensitive data by using dynamic data masking. The solution must minimize costs. What should you include in the recommendation? A. Azure SQL Managed Instance. B. Azure Synapse Analytics dedicated SQL pools. C. Azure SQL Database. D. SQL Server on Azure Virtual Machines. 7. You have an Azure subscription that has Microsoft Defender for Cloud enabled. Suspicious authentication activity alerts have been appearing in the Workload Protections dashboard. You need to recommend a solution to evaluate and remediate the alerts by using workflow automation. The solution must minimize development effort. What should you include in the recommendation? A. Azure Monitor Webhooks. B. Azure Logix Apps. C. Azure Event Hubs. D. Azure Functions Apps. 8. Your company has an Azure subscription that has enhanced security enabled for Microsoft Defender for Cloud. The company signs a contract with the United States government. You need to review the current subscription for NIST 800-53 compliance. What should you do first? A. From Defender for Cloud, review the Secure Score recommendations. B. From Microsoft Sentinel, configure the Microsoft Defender for Cloud Data Connector. C. From Defender for Cloud, review the Azure Security Baseline for Audit Report. D. From Defender for Cloud, add a regulatory compliance standard. 9. Azure subscription that uses Azure Storage. The company plans to share specific blobs with vendors. You need to recommend a solution to provide the vendors with secure access to specific blobs without exposing the blobs publicly. The access must be TME-VIM, TED. What should you include in the recommendation? A. Create shared access signatures, SAS. B. Share the connection string of the access key. C. Configure private link connections. D. Configure encryption by using customer-managed keys, CMKs. 10. Your company has an on-premises network and an Azure subscription. The company does not have a site-to-site VPN or an ExpressRoute connection to Azure. You are designing the security standards for Azure App Service web apps. The web apps will access Microsoft SQL Server databases on the network. You need to recommend security standards that will allow the web apps to access the databases. The solution must minimize the number of open Internet accessible endpoints to the on-premises network. What should you include in the recommendation? A. A private endpoint. B. Hybrid connections. C. Virtual network NAT gateway integration. D. Virtual network integration.